In today's video podcast, I'm going to address the tactics some buyers are using in this multiple offer market to waive the right to an option period, making the contract more attractive to a seller, and instead they rely on other contractual outs when the property does not inspect well. What are the other outs for buyers under the contract, and what is the risk if buyers use this tactic? There are several buyers' outs under the TREC contracts, but the outs that are separate from the option period are tied to a reason. If the reason does not exist, the buyer does not have the right to terminate. Examples of these outs include title and survey objections under paragraph 6D of the contract, buyer's failure to get buyer approval under paragraph 2A of the third-party financing addendum, buyer's failure to get property approval under paragraph 2B of the third-party financing addendum, subject to the waiver under the appraisal addendum, buyer's termination after receipt of the subdivision information under paragraphs A1 and 2 of the addendum for properties subject to mandatory membership in a property owners association, buyer's failure to receive the proceeds on the sale of his home under the sale of other property addendum, buyer's failure to get copies of any residential lease and fixture leases buyer will assume, and more. The risk of a buyer waiving an option period and relying on other outs under the contract to terminate when the property does not inspect well is that the reason for the out may never exist. For instance, a buyer cannot terminate the contract based on objections to title and survey if the commitment and survey issued after the contract's executed show nothing to which the buyer can object. There are certain exceptions to title that the buyer has already accepted under paragraph 6A 1 through 9. Those exceptions are not objectionable unless the exception or exceptions prohibit a specific use that buyer inserted in paragraph 6D. No reason for objection, then no right to terminate. A buyer cannot terminate for failure to get buyer approval if, in fact, after providing the necessary documents to the lender, buyer's credit and income meet the lender's criteria and the loan terms are available. Some buyers try to get out under buyer approval when they have not even yet applied for the loan. The contract requires a buyer to apply promptly and provide the necessary documents for approval before he or she can terminate for failure to obtain buyer approval. Under property approval, buyer cannot terminate the contract without a letter from the lender stating why the property was not approved. Under certain other provisions of the contract, buyer's right to terminate exists only if seller has not provided the required information prior to execution of the contract, such as the seller's disclosure notice or copies of the residential and fixture leases the buyer will assume, or HOA information. The out most buyers rely on in lieu of an option period comes under the provisions in the addendum for properties subject to mandatory membership in a property owners association, which says a buyer can terminate the contract within 3 days of receipt of the subdivision information documents for any reason when those documents are not provided until after execution of the contract. This is a pretty open-ended out for a buyer, and I have talked about this in several video podcasts. I suggest seller order the information before entering a contract to avoid this open-ended out. But if seller allows the out, the risk to buyer of using this out for inspections is that if instead of taking the 10 or so days to provide the required subdivision information, seller provides the information on day 1 of the contract, buyer then only has 3 days after receipt to terminate the contract, which may not be enough time to do inspections. If you have further questions about buyer's outs under the contract or addenda, please reach out to me at my office email address. If you have topics to address on future podcasts, please send your suggestions to tipoftheweek@allegiancetitle.com. Thank you.